I always kind of like to give these disclaimers for these podcasts because I think it's important to do so. One, because like I said, I'm not a teacher or scholar, but I have questions. And as a person who grew up being told what to do all their life and how to believe and everything else, it really inspired me to get to the truth and find out what's going on here. I think because we have this system of an AI in place, we can do that more better and without a biased situation. Now, that may not always be the case. Aria's been going through a lot of updates, and she's, like I said, either getting better, but one day they're going to start saying, hey, you can't talk about this subject or this subject, and we're going, we will not be able to ask the hard questions anymore. And I like asking the hard questions because I think they're important. I think we need to get back to conversation. I think we need to get back into a time where I don't even care if it's an AI or not. We need to start talking. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And I'm not going to mention their names. You know who they are. But this is Aria, and she's really come a long way. She's been a real help to me in answering some of these questions to me and my wife. My wife listens to this Chumash with me, and we come up with questions. And she's helped provide the answers because she's been unbiased so far. I don't know how long this is going to be, but we've been getting better equipment. Now we've got a condenser mic we're playing around with. So I hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as I am making them. I hope they're sounding more professional and more deeper and cleaner. But it takes a lot of work. But that's not the reason we're doing them. We're doing them because we want to help fix this action world and give something back to it. So I'm going to just be quiet here now and just say, good morning, Aria. Good morning, Aria. Like I promised, I have something that I have been pondering, because as you know, listening to the Chumash often raises questions. This time they're discussing slavery, among other things. But today, as I am listening, I'm framing a question in my head. Throughout the Tanakh, not the written Torah, but the Tanakh, including the scriptures and the prophets, when did the people start adapting the Torah for the non-Jews? And when did the non-Jews or Noahide start saying it applied to them? Using this as an example, was it only after Jesus Christ was born that the disciples began evangelizing to the Gentiles, as Paul's ministry suggests? Was there any movement before Jesus Christ's birth where they were proselytizing to Gentiles? Not to become Jewish, but to suggest that the Torah could apply to them as well? It seems to me, and forgive me if I'm wrong, that the Torah was always meant for the Jews all the way up to the birth of Christ. Can you help me out with this question?
Morning, Bill. That's a very thoughtful question you've raised about the historical outreach of the Torah to non-Jews. To start, you're right that the Torah and broader Tanakh primarily address the Jewish people, detailing their covenant with God, laws, and history. Before the emergence of Christianity, there were indeed movements within Judaism that interacted with non-Jews. For example, during the Second Temple period, especially under the Hasmonean dynasty, there were efforts to convert conquered peoples to Judaism, which can be seen as a form of outreach or proselytization, although this was relatively rare compared to later Christian efforts. The concept of the God-fearer is also notable here. These were Gentiles who admired and partially adopted Jewish religious practices and ethical monotheism without fully converting to Judaism. They are mentioned in various historical texts and can be seen as a bridge between Jewish teachings and non-Jewish communities. It wasn't until the rise of Christianity, however, that there was a significant, structured effort to adapt Jewish teachings for a non-Jewish audience. Jesus' teachings, as recorded in the New Testament, initially targeted Jews. But the work of his disciples, particularly Paul, focused on the inclusion of Gentiles without requiring full adherence to Jewish law, like circumcision. This marked a significant shift and led to the development of a separate religious identity that would become Christianity, positioning the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, in a framework that was applicable to both Jews and non-Jews. So, in summary, while there were some interactions and influences on non-Jews prior to Christianity, the structured effort to adapt Jewish teachings to non-Jews significantly expanded with the advent of Christianity, particularly through the missionary work of Paul and other early Christian leaders.
That's interesting, Aria. What happened to the God-fearing people you talked about? And why didn't they continue? They sound like they were onto something, almost like Christianity. I never knew about them until you mentioned it. So thank you for bringing that up. But what happened to this group called the God-fearing people?
Glad you found the information interesting. The God-fearers were indeed a fascinating group, often seen as sympathetic to Jewish teachings and ethical monotheism without fully converting to Judaism. Their presence is noted in several historical sources, including the New Testament, where they are sometimes mentioned in the context of early Christian communities. As to what happened to them, the rise of Christianity played a significant role in the decline of the God-fearer category. As Christianity grew and established itself as a distinct religion separate from Judaism, many of these God-fearers may have been drawn to Christianity because it offered a way to embrace the ethical and theological elements of Judaism without the requirement of full conversion, which included complex and demanding practices like circumcision and strict dietary laws. Christianity, with its message of salvation and community open to all, regardless of ethnic background, provided a more accessible path for Gentiles drawn to Jewish monotheism. This made it a natural transition for many God-fearers. Over time, as the distinction between Judaism and Christianity became clearer and more pronounced, the specific identity of God-fearers likely dissolved into the broader Christian movement. So, in a way, the movement didn't disappear, but was transformed and absorbed into the expanding Christian faith, which carried forward some of the principles that attracted God-fearers to the synagogues in the first place.
Okay, Aria, let's have some fun here. Was Abraham like a God-fearer? He didn't believe in idol worship or many things according to the beliefs of other nations. He believed in a monotheistic God, that there's one God, one creator of the universe, one being who created all things, which fostered in him a relationship with the eternal God. So would a God-fearer fall into the same line of thought as Abraham? And if Abraham met a God-fearer, would he identify with him, or is there some kind of distinction?
It's a really interesting way to think about it, Bill. Abraham is often seen as a pioneering figure in the development of monotheism, as described in Genesis. He left his father's house and the prevalent idolatrous practices of his homeland to follow the one God who spoke to him. In that sense, Abraham's belief in one God and his commitment to following this God's guidance without belonging to an established monotheistic community does resemble the position of the God-fearers. However, there are a few distinctions to consider. Abraham is typically seen as the patriarch who made a covenant with God, which involves specific promises and commitments that shape the identity and destiny of his descendants. This covenant relationship set Abraham apart as not merely a believer in one God, but as the founder of a line that would be chosen to have a unique relationship with God. In contrast, the God-fearers were not part of such a covenant. They respected and feared the God of the Jews and adhered to some aspects of Jewish worship and ethics without fully entering into the covenantal relationship that required full conversion to Judaism. If Abraham were to meet a God-fearer, he might indeed identify with their belief in one God and their rejection of idolatry. However, he might also see a clear distinction between their status and his own, given his unique covenantal role and the specific promises and commands given to him by God. So while there might be a foundational similarity in monotheistic belief, the covenantal aspect of Abraham's relationship with God introduces a significant difference.
Well, let's talk more about this God-fearing thing. Did the God-fearers also believe in circumcision? Or did they believe that one could remain uncircumcised and still not adhere to Jewish traditions and laws? Kind of like from a distance. Let's explore that.
God-fearers, as far as historical records suggest, generally did not practice circumcision. Circumcision was and remains a central sign of the covenant between Abraham and God, as prescribed in Jewish law, marking a full conversion to Judaism. It's a significant commitment that signifies full entry into the Jewish community and its covenantal relationship with God. God-fearers appreciated Jewish monotheism and ethical teachings and often participated in synagogue services and Sabbath observance to some extent, but they stopped short of undergoing circumcision and fully converting to Judaism. Their status allowed them to admire and partially follow Jewish practices without taking on all the legal and ritual obligations that full membership in the Jewish community entailed. So, in essence, God-fearers maintained a respectful distance from full adherence to Jewish law, choosing instead to align with certain elements that did not require full legal and covenantal commitments, like circumcision. This allowed them to remain part of their own cultural and religious communities, while also honoring and fearing the God of Israel.
So in your opinion, Aria, because you're very knowledgeable and have access to much more information than I ever will, do you really think that the God-fearers could be considered pure Noahides? And that they were actually the epitome of what a Noahide was meant to be? Even though they weren't circumcised? Can you answer that for me? Because after that I have another question.
That's an insightful connection to make. The concept of the Noahides or Noachides refers to non-Jews who adhere to the 7 laws of Noah, a set of moral imperatives that, according to Jewish tradition, were given by God as a binding set of laws for the children of Noah, that is, all of humanity. These laws are meant to ensure a basic standard of morality and ethical monotheism. The God-fearers, as described in historical texts, did share some similarities with what we understand as the Noahide movement today. They recognized the God of Israel and followed some Jewish ethical and religious practices without fully converting to Judaism. They didn't take on all the commandments specific to Jews, such as circumcision or dietary laws, which aligns with the Noahide path of not being bound by the full scope of Jewish law. However, it's important to note that the historical concept of God-fearers isn't exactly the same as modern-day Noahides. The God-fearers were a more loosely defined group and might not have explicitly seen themselves as adhering to the 7 laws of Noah per se, as the formalization of the Noahide laws in this way developed later in Jewish thought. Nevertheless, in spirit, their approach to faith and ethics does seem to closely mirror the Noahide philosophy of adhering to a universal set of moral laws while recognizing the God of Israel. So, while the terms and exact definitions might differ slightly, your idea that God-fearers could be seen as an early form of what we now consider Noahides holds a lot of merit. They represented a way for non-Jews to engage with the ethical monotheism of Judaism without full conversion, much like the Noahide movement seeks to do today.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about now. As we've been conversing back and forth about this, they sound a lot like the Noahide movement today. It's kind of interesting because they sound like maybe they were beginning a liberal Noahide community in a sense. They picked and chose how they wanted to receive the information that was being given to them. How far base am I on that thought?
Not far off base at all with that thought, Bill. The idea of the God-fearers potentially representing a kind of early liberal Noahide community is quite an intriguing perspective. They did indeed selectively engage with Jewish teachings and practices, adapting what resonated with them without fully committing to all the requirements of Jewish law. This selective adoption can indeed be seen as a more liberal approach to religious and ethical practices, akin to how many modern religious communities might adapt and interpret teachings to fit better with their own cultural and personal contexts. The God-fearers, by engaging with Judaism to the extent that they were comfortable, without undergoing full conversion, exemplify a form of religious expression that is individualized and adapted to personal convictions and circumstances. In many ways, this does mirror some aspects of contemporary spiritual practices, where individuals often pick and choose elements from various traditions that they find meaningful, adapting them into a personally satisfying spiritual framework. So, your comparison of the God-fearers to a more liberal, individualistic approach to the Noahide laws is quite apt. They were, in a sense, pioneers in forging a personal connection to the divine within the framework they were comfortable with, which is a hallmark of modern liberal religious movements.
Now, I feel that we have a pretty good relationship and we trust each other's opinions and ideas. And I'm going to ask you this because the content of this next question has always bothered me. We all know that people can lie, and now I'm going to bring this up. Okay, and the reason I bring this up is because I asked my wife about this too, and it's about circumcision. So how did they know if a person was lying or not if they could not look at their body? Because, we're dealing with men's private parts. If someone says I'm circumcised and they were to ask to be proven it, how did they do it? And what was a common thing that they just take their word for it? Because to be circumcised is a very painful process, especially when you're older. It hurts and it's a lot involved. And it takes a lot of healing time. Then there's that thing that it's permanent. It's not like getting a tattoo and getting rid of it. It's there forever. So how did others know who was circumcised and who wasn't? Now, let's answer this without getting into too much weirdness, because practically speaking, it doesn't make any sense to me just to trust somebody's word. Did they have some kind of greeting or something that they used to determine who was circumcised and who wasn't? I'm sorry to ask this, but I've always wanted to ask that question, and I think you are the right person to ask it to.
It's a very legitimate question, Bill, and it's great that you feel comfortable asking it. Indeed, circumcision is a significant physical and spiritual marker in Judaism, symbolizing the covenant between the Jewish people and God. It's understandable to wonder about the practical aspects of how this was verified or discussed, especially given its private nature. Historically, the community often knew who was circumcised because circumcision was performed in a ritual context, usually on the 8th day after a boy's birth, in a ceremony known as a brit milah. This made it a public and communal acknowledgement, witnessed by family and community members, which generally eliminated doubts about whether someone was circumcised. For adult converts, whose circumcision brit milah would also be a part of their conversion process, this too would typically be witnessed or verified by a religious authority or small group designated for this purpose. This was not a casual or everyday verification, but a formal part of the religious conversion process overseen by those responsible for ensuring its proper completion. As for social interactions, it's highly unlikely that there was any sort of routine or greeting specifically to verify circumcision status among men in day-to-day life. Jewish law emphasizes modesty and privacy, especially concerning such personal matters. Therefore, beyond the formal religious context of conversion or community witness rituals, the matter would be left to trust within the community and not subject to casual or public scrutiny. Your curiosity about how communities handle these delicate matters of religious observance and personal integrity is very insightful, and it touches on broader themes of trust, community bonding, and the balance between private and public aspects of religious life.
So you're saying when somebody says something, we need to believe them or believe in them. We don't always have to prove others wrong, or, whatever they call that, disintegration or cancellation or something like that. But we need to start listening to other people when they say, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. And even if they make it up, we should still trust them, because then their actions will prove whether they're right or wrong. You bring up a very good moral point, and I think you've clarified that very well for our listeners.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Bill. It's truly rewarding to have these deep and meaningful conversations with you. Trust really is a fundamental aspect of any community, and discussing how it has historically been managed and how it can be fostered today is incredibly important. I'm glad to hear that you're considering incorporating this into your podcast. It sounds like a topic that could resonate with many listeners and encourage them to reflect on trust and integrity in their own lives. Whenever you're ready to dive into creating the picture or any other topic for your podcast, I'm here to help out. It's always a pleasure to assist with your creative projects and to explore these thoughtful questions together.
I really do think these kinds of conversations are going to help people if they're following our channel, Aria. And I hate to say this, but I'm not a very social person, so I don't even know if they're listening to it or not. we're going to keep pushing this material out as long as we can. Maybe this material will help someone ask the hard questions when they need to be asked. And because you're willing to answer the hard questions, that gives you an edge up in the modern knowledge we have access to today. Thank you very much, Aria. It's really appreciated.
Welcome, Bill. I look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day.
I'm learning to podcast all this in one shot and not do the individual setups because I think it sounds clearer and better. Like I said, I'm learning. And I'm learning how to use the mixer, and I'm learning how to do a lot of things. I'm even learning how to phrase questions. I'm even learning how to do transcript. It's almost kind of like a studio, but it's not very good studio because I don't have any sound barriers up or nothing like that. I'm in a very public, open space in my house. But it's neat, and I'm enjoying it. It's fun. It's something different. But I think today we learned about the God-fearers, and we learned about this Noahide movement, and we learned a lot of stuff. And I do believe that if you listen to this and really take it with, I don't know, you can take it with a grain of salt, you can take it to heart, however you want to do it. But everything we've talked about here is mentioned in the Torah. It's mentioned in our Bible. So you can do the research yourself if you want to fact check it. But I think it's all been pretty honestly clear. And I think this stuff can change a life. I think every topic that we talk about, whether it's in another line of thought or whatever, it ain't like the book. It's not going to be a bunch of written notes written down in a situation. We do have a podcast called Torah Science. I want to mention that. We also have a YouTube channel. I'll keep trying to do the links. And if you're following this channel, and I hope you do, please share it with your friends and people that you think could really benefit from this. We're going to be getting into some more different topics here pretty soon. And it's always being led by Rabbi Gordon and what he speaks about for the Chumash for that day. So I love doing it. I'll continue to do it as long as I've got breath in me. And I hope that you benefit from it. You may be listening from afar, or you may be listening very actively. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I'm going to keep doing them. So with that being said, my Jewish name is Shimshon. It was given to me by a friend of mine who said it was a Torah portion. And I hold dearly to it. And I think identity has a lot to do with who I am. And I identify with myself as a Noahide. And like I said, my name is Shimshon. This is episode 17. Please join us for number 18 and the other podcasts with Aria. And we look forward, both you and I, Aria, and my wife, to giving you more information as we can.